Greetings and shalom everybody, VFI News observers, and anyone else watching this broadcast. First off, I want to tell you all a happy big Passover. Enjoy your Passover meal together. Now, it's been another action-packed week here in Israel, with the threats from Iran being at the center of much of it. On Sunday evening, there was a barrage of 10 rockets fired at the southern Israeli cities of Ashdod and Ashkelon, the largest barrage in many months. It came amidst a renewed IDF ground offensive in Gaza. On the northern front, the IDF has continued to pound Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, and Hezbollah is barely even protesting anymore. Next door in Syria, Turkey's attempt to take control of former Assad regime air bases is in disarray after the IDF blew those bases to smithereens, and the regime of Abu Muhammad al-Julani is reported to have given Israel the green light to do it. But the main event dominating the front page of all the newspapers in this country is the apparently imminent attack on Iran's renegade nuclear program. The United States and Israel are moving forces into position as Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the White House for what appeared to be last-minute consultations on plans for a coordinated strike. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. We're starting this week's report with the story about the rocket attack from the Gaza Strip last Sunday evening, because this is an issue that is very close to our hearts here at Vision for Israel. For several years now, we've been asking you to support our project of placing bomb safety shelters at various public venues. As most of you probably know, Israeli homes, schools, hospitals, and businesses are required to be built with shelters and safe rooms. But most people don't stay inside the house all the time. People walk their dogs, go to work, have picnics, play football, ride their bikes, etc. When they're out and about, there needs to be somewhere they can run to if the rocket alert siren starts wailing, as it did in the cities of Ashdod and Ashkelon Sunday evening. Now, I know some of you are thinking, what about the Iron Dome system we've heard so much about? Doesn't this system have the ability to shoot down any incoming rockets that the radar system and the computers show is headed towards a populated area? Can't these systems determine which rockets are dangerous and fire an interceptor at them while ignoring the rockets which are headed for an open area where they won't hit anything? The answer to both of these is yes, and also no. To be perfectly clear, most of the time the Iron Dome intercepts the rockets that are headed for populated areas. But every once in a while, something goes wrong and one of these rockets gets through the defenses. That's what happened in Ashkelon last Sunday. One of the rockets that the Iron Dome thought was headed for a public park instead hit on the street right next to several parked cars. The resulting explosion totaled several cars, and what's much worse, they also wounded 3 people, one of whom was hurt badly enough that he had to be evacuated to the hospital. Lord, just bless that person and heal them. This is the sort of thing that sometimes happens, even with the Iron Dome. The other thing that you have to understand is that even if an incoming rocket gets intercepted in the air, the debris and shrapnel from the interception, meaning bits of extremely hot metal and explosives from both the incoming rocket and the interceptor itself, quickly fall to the earth. If people are underneath the falling debris and they've got nothing to protect them, they can be hurt by it. That's why these shelters are necessary friends. And I'll add a footnote to all this, that rockets which don't get intercepted and the falling debris from intercepted rockets can fall on flammable things like trees, wooden buildings, etc. And that can result in fires. Now, almost 60,000 acres of forested areas in Israel's northern border areas have burned in this war because of fires that got started this way. All of this means Vision for Israel has a lot of work to do in continuing to install bomb safety shelters and also supporting civil defense teams like paramedics, ambulances, and so on and so forth, firefighters and others, and we need your help for that. So please watch this short video about these projects. know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back, friends. And while we still have bomb safety shelters and civil defense teams on our minds, I want to offer a quick reminder that the main event, the big battle with Iran, is still ahead of us. There is a high likelihood of at least one more large barrage of ballistic missiles from Iran, and if that's not enough, there's the looming threat of more conflict with Turkey and perhaps also Egypt. We'll talk about that more later in the report. But for now, just let me reinforce what you saw in this video, that we need your help and assistance to get Israel ready for whatever comes next. And you can help us by going to our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. All right, now let's get back into the news. As the IDF has expanded and is continuing to expand its ground operations in the Gaza Strip. Remember that the ceasefire started in January and was meant to continue for many months while negotiations to release the remaining 59 Israeli hostages continued. Israel came to the point where the political leadership determined that Hamas was not serious about being willing to release more hostages. So the decision was made to resume fighting and try getting the hostages back by putting greater military pressure on Hamas. Now, not everyone agrees with this decision, and that includes the families of many of these hostages, some of whom are even accusing Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yisrael Katz of ignoring the possibility of getting more hostages back through making concessions. That's why I wear this pin, to remind us all about praying for the release of these hostages. Well, according to the narrative, the decision to return to fighting was made not because it's the best way to get the hostages back, but because it was what Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich was demanding in order to keep his faction in the governing coalition. Otzma Yehudit faction leader Itamar Ben-Gvir also agreed to rejoin the coalition after fighting resumed. This narrative, which I am neither endorsing nor rejecting, is held as true by a large section of the Israeli electorate. By that, I mean there's a recent poll that was published showing that an astonishing 70% of Israelis think that Netanyahu is making decisions based not on what's best for the country, but rather what's best for him personally. Once again, I'll not say whether I'm among the 70% or not, but I will without equivocation say that this is a very sad commentary on current events. Netanyahu has been serving the country all his life and has done some really amazing things. But a lot of people think that he's stayed on too long and allowed himself to become corrupted both personally and politically. I make no comment of my own except to repeat what I've said many times, that he's not going to be there in office forever. And we all need to think long and hard about what we'll do on the day after Bibi. That's his nickname for Netanyahu. I've heard some speculation that he's holding on until this situation with Iran gets resolved, which might be happening after Passover by the end of this month. And we'll talk about that more later in the report. But Bibi Netanyahu has been shouting from the rooftops about the need to sort out Iran's nuclear weapons program for many years now, and that might be about to happen. So maybe he's just holding on till this is done, and then he'll be ready to step aside. Or maybe not, who knows? We'll find out when he's good and ready for us to find out. That much I'm sure of. Now, if we cast our gaze to the northern arena, there was plenty of news up that way this week. The Hezbollah terrorist organization keeps trying to quietly move forces and specialists south of the Litani River to try and reestablish a presence there so they can continue to threaten Israel. Israel continues to catch these guys in the act and blast them with airstrikes. This has happened several times in the last week, and every time we all wonder when they're going to stop testing us. So far, they haven't wised up, or maybe they'd like to quit and take a really long break from this game, but they're not being forced to continue by their Iranian masters who want them to provide a distraction to Israel as they confront the Americans. Another bit of drama up north concerns two Air Force bases built by the Assad regime in Syria and used for decades in all the wars that country fought against Israel. They were the military airports in Hama and another airport in central Syria, simply known as T4. You might have noticed I said they were called by these names, but now all you can call them is large smoking pile of burnt rubbish, 1 and 2, because the Israeli Air Force bombed both of them out of existence this past week rather than allow the Turkish Air Force to set up a shop there. Now there's a footnote here, and it's very interesting. The interim government of Syria, led by Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, is reported to have quietly given Israel the go-ahead to destroy these bases. Despite the widely held belief that al-Jolani is a Turkish client, if this is true, then it means he's got a pragmatic streak in him, and he's also got his own plans and priorities. But Turkish TAFI President Recep Erdogan has already deployed large ground forces to the northern parts of Syria and has expressed great nostalgia for the Ottoman Empire, just as Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed nostalgia for the Soviet Union. What is it with these guys anyway? But that wasn't the only bizarre comment Erdogan was making this past week. At a ceremony to mark the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Fitr, he asked his God to wipe out Israel, and you can presume he would like Turkey to be the instrument of his God's wrath on this earth. Well, men like him tend to see themselves as instruments in the hands of their God, and they also tend to see their God as a divine version of themselves. Now put that together and you have a very dangerous combination. And I'll just add in this context once again that Vladimir Putin has a view of himself and Russia's national destiny as being not very different from Ezekiel's vision. Now, in case you haven't read Ezekiel's chapter 38 to 39 lately, I urge you after this news broadcast to go ahead and read them again. I am not, and I have never been, one of those self-declared prophets who point to a specific time and date and tries to tell everyone that God told me this is the time and date the balloon is going up. But I am very comfortable saying in public and out loud that we are in a prophetic season of history. Forces are on the move in the natural and in the spiritual, and we must be praying and paying attention. How do you like those words? Praying and paying attention. I'm glad you watch these news videos, and I'm glad you're interested in what happens here in Israel. But if you're not taking the time to read the scriptures daily, pray and fast, and continue in fellowship with other believers, watching videos like this one won't be enough. It's very important to stay grounded in the Word of God. Otherwise, it's very easy to fall into deception and error. Now, with that in mind, the next news story comes from a bit further to the south from the Gaza Strip in the Sinai Peninsula, where the Egyptian army is increasing the size and firepower of its forces. This is a flagrant violation of the 1979 Camp David Accords, the treaty which formally ended the state of war that had existed between Egypt and Israel since 1948 and had resulted in 5 hot wars and many years of uneasy standoff in between. Since 1979, the Sinai was demilitarized with neither Israeli nor Egyptian forces allowed to be there. The Egyptians had a force of lightly armed police in order to keep law and order among the sparse population of the territory, but there were no heavy divisions with tanks, helicopters, jets, bombers, or artillery. But starting about 15 years ago, criminal gangs started using the Sinai as a base of operations to smuggle narcotics, go and figure, weapons and people and all kinds of other contraband all over the Middle East. As the years went on, other groups, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS, also began using this area as a staging ground for their regional operations, and that was a danger to both Israel and Egypt. Because of this, in coordination with Israel as well as the Americans, Egypt slowly began to send more heavily armed and equipped troops into the Sinai in order to re-establish control there. Now that force has grown to dimensions far beyond what's necessary to confront the threat from ISIS, and they're very publicly carrying out training exercises which make it obvious that they're actually there to confront the IDF. Is this just muscle flexing on the part of al-Sisi's regime in Egypt so they can show their own people they're strong? Or is there something more sinister and serious going on? Or is it something in between with the potential for escalation? I think it's the last option myself, and Israel is working with the Americans to try and get some clarity and dial back the Egyptian moves. But that's not so easy, and so this is one more problem we all have to keep our eyes on and continue praying. Now remember what I said about Ezekiel's chapter 38 to 39? Did you pause the video and go read it, or are you going to wait until afterwards? What are you waiting for anyways? Well, maybe you should wait until the video is over after all, because the last part is the one that has the most immediate potential for all this to really kick into high gear. I'm talking, of course, about the escalating chances of a direct, widespread, and potentially devastating kinetic battle between Iran and the United States. Netanyahu was summoned, or invited, if that sounds better, to the White House for an urgent meeting with President Trump on Monday. It's not hard to imagine that finalizing this last-minute plans for a joint strike on Iran would have been at the top of their agenda. But there was another item that they would be sure to discuss, and that's the 17% tariffs that the United States has imposed on Israeli exports. Now, compared to some countries, Israel got off pretty easy. And that might be because in the days leading up to the April 2nd Liberation Day imposition of tariffs on exports of countries around the world to the United States, Israel abolished most of its tariffs and value-added taxes on imports from the United States. But these new tariffs could result in a big hit to Israel's economy nonetheless, and Netanyahu is likely to try to lighten the blow somehow or other. I'm not sure how that would work out, or what Israel can do that we haven't already done, frankly. Most Israeli companies that export to the United States already have subsidiaries there that employ thousands of American workers and pay quite a bit in taxes to the U.S. Treasury. I don't know a whole lot about that stuff, but I do know this: Israel's economy is already in bad shape, and as we mark a year and a half since the start of the war, many small and medium-sized businesses that were just beginning to recover from COVID have closed under the strain. The economy has shed enormous numbers of jobs, and billions of dollars worth of capital has been moved out of the country by investors. For this reason, Vision for Israel has never been more busy raising support for our projects that provide assistance to families in financial distress. So please watch this short video about some of these projects. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know, having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. And Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. The United States Air Force has deployed at least 7 B-2 strategic bombers to the Indian Ocean island base of Diego Garcia. From this base, they can easily strike Iranian territory with immense amounts of firepower, including massive ordnance penetrator bombs, which were specifically designed and built to destroy bunkers built deep underground. They weigh 30,000 pounds. Iran always talks about the massive arsenal of ballistic missiles it has in such underground bunkers, and they threaten to use these weapons to launch preemptive attacks against the base in Diego Garcia. But military analysts say that this base is beyond the range of these missiles. Iran does have drones that can just barely make it to Diego Garcia, but they fly slowly and have no stealth capability, so they would not be a problem for American defenses. Speaking of defenses, Iran has also threatened to hit U.S. bases in Turkey and Qatar in retaliation. If they are used to launch attacks, and of course they're also threatening to hit Israel, despite their previous attacks last April and again last October being almost totally ineffective, I guess maybe they'll think a third time will charm everybody else and threaten us. Well, just in case that's what they have in mind, the U.S. has deployed an additional battery of the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System, or THAAD system, to Israel this past week. This is part of a modular system that can plug into established U.S. radar and air defense networks already in place here in Israel and around the region. This is not to mention the USS Harry Truman Carrier Battle Group, which is already in the Red Sea conducting relentless attacks against the Iranian-backed Houthis, and the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Battle Group, which I believe is either on its way or already in place. Well, anyhow, a footnote here is that Iran has reportedly ordered the forces it had deployed to Yemen to assist the Houthis to come back home this past week. Apparently, they have decided that the Houthis are a lost cause and they don't want to waste time anymore, money, or their own soldiers assisting them. The United States military has been pounding away at them for almost 3 weeks now, and they have lost several of their senior commanders and much of their strategic weapons. There has not been a ballistic missile fired at Israel from Yemen in several days, which is a very good thing. I hope there's never any more either. Beyond that, the United States has powerful forces deployed at different military bases in the region which could potentially participate in any attacks on Iran. But the Iranians are threatening those countries with grave consequences if they allow the U.S. to launch attacks from these bases. Frankly, I think this is a good chance for the Turks in particular to tell the Ayatollahs that they're not afraid of them, but that's not my call to make. And in any case, it might not even be necessary because after their meeting at the White House on Monday morning, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu emerged to tell the media some very surprising news. First and foremost, Trump astounded everyone by saying that direct preliminary talks between American and Iranian officials over the nuclear program are already underway and will begin in earnest on Saturday. He added that things will get very dangerous for Iran if they try and trick us or if they don't make any rapid progress. Now let me switch to commentary mode as we come to the end of this report, and I'll tell you what I think about all this. To start with, obviously, I hope President Trump is right and we can find a way to end this standoff without bloodshed. But when I say bloodshed, I'm not talking about a paper cut. I'm talking about massive numbers of casualties, terrifying amounts of destruction, and a catastrophic blow to the global economy, which is already in very bad shape. Most of the casualties would be in Iran, and I'm actually not very worried about an attack on Israel. We've already had attacks from Iran and the Houthis, and our defense systems seem to have proven to be more than adequate. But there would probably also be attacks on Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and possibly Qatar. This has the potential to be devastating to the world economy no matter what, and I really have no idea how good their defenses are. Of course, last but not least, there's no way to know how many casualties there might be among the American and Israeli forces attacking Iran. Their military is a sad joke, but there are always lucky shots in every war for Iran and others. In other words, friends, it would be better for everyone if this long-standing problem can be resolved through negotiations. But there are all kinds of ways that this could still go sideways. The Iranians might just be stalling for time as their scientists race towards a nuclear weapons capability. They might think that once they have it, the Americans won't dare attack them. Or maybe they're just trying to lull us into a false sense of security, so we'll let our guard down, and then they'll try and pull out a preemptive strike against U.S. and Israeli military forces like reports in the British media said they were considering. The Iranian regime is like a wounded animal or a cat that's been backed into a corner, and that makes them very dangerous and unpredictable. Let us hope for the best while continuing to prepare for the worst. Now, I'd like to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news, and it comes to us from the city of Jerusalem, where this past Friday, over 40,000 runners participated in the largest marathon ever in the capital. This wasn't just about celebrating the beautiful spring weather by running outside. It was about celebrating the resilience and strength of this country after 18 months of war, which isn't over yet. Well, on that note, I'm Barry Siegel. Remember to pray for the hostages. And this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom.